This is the Erasing Shame podcast. Honest talk for healthy living, growing, and thriving.
Welcome to a new episode of Erasing Shame, and this is a special episode because I am sitting across the screen and across the miles with Vanessa Yee, and she is a filmmaker from USC, and she does some other fascinating things that we'll unpack in the time that we have today. And she's in San Jose. I'm in Orange County, here south of Irvine. And we like to start our show with the first question about shame. So, Vanessa, what do you think of when you hear the word shame?
So I'm going to promise you a really good answer to that question. However, you said I was from USC, which I definitely have to correct. As a Bruin, I cannot claim to be a Trojan. I never would want to be a Trojan. I'm sure
I'm so sorry.
Wonderful USC people out there that I'm not going to hate on, but I cannot. It's okay. It's okay. We're going to move on. It's going to be great. But I just had to clarify so that nobody thinks I'm ever from USC, because I come from a Bruin family.
I've spoken, and I have egg on my face, and I could fix and post, but we're not, because
we're not gonna, because this is a learning moment.
Yes.
And now
I will never forget that now.
And everybody's gonna be like, "Oh, she's so obnoxiously UCLA." I almost said USC. Almost made the mistake myself. But to answer your question, I think when I think of shame, I also hear the word silence within that phrase. Shame and silence go hand in hand for me, especially as it relates to my documentary, as it related to my first conceptions as an adult of what shame is. But I think, as I was making the documentary and somebody mentioned, shame, the opposite of shame is shamelessness. Mm-hmm. And so there's a sense that shame can be useful. And a lot of times we think of the East versus the West, these kind of dichotomies. And what we really have is a range of things. And even in therapy, I'm trying to reinterpret that word. So when I find shame useful is when behaviorally it helps me be a better person. It helps me be others aware. And I think that's where my therapist is like, well, we don't have to use shame to describe the idea of learning to think of others before yourself. Because I think that's what is kind of beautiful about, this idea of a more group or community culture. Yes, shame is a very limiting factor. It's a very here's what is good and here's what is bad, and it shapes a lot of the way we form our character and things like that.
Oh yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For better, for worse. Right. But sometimes I think that I learned how to be a better listener because I was shamed as an extrovert to go, hey, hold space for these other types of people. So I have a little bit of I'm trying to nuance that word in my mind, if that makes sense.
No, that's excellent. And that's some of the conversation that we've delved into, that shame, because it's not talked about and therefore it grows and festers in silence. As we started our conversations on the Erasing Shame podcast, we realized we don't even know how to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And there are so many dimensions to it, like you said, the good side, as well as the motivational side, as well as the relational and group-oriented side, and how it shows up when we do talk about it, or when it shows up in film, and what kind of conversations that starts up. But before we get into your documentary, how have you experienced shame, whether it was in your family or in your teen or high school, college, young adult life? Just one story that you would feel okay sharing, so that people kind of get a little background for who you are and what motivated you to create this documentary.
One top of mind instance of shame that I've experienced is being shamed for not being Asian enough or not Chinese enough specifically. So I'm a third generation Chinese American, and I talk a little bit about it in my film, but it means you're very Americanized. I never went to Chinese school. My go-to example is I was in soccer camp while everybody was doing aerobics in Chinese school. You know, the Saturday aerobics where the radio is playing and the woman is, you know, shouting instructions in Chinese. So that's definitely not my experience. So I would get shamed by other Chinese people, but also people who weren't Chinese. Like my Russian documentary professor was like, "How come you don't know your mother tongue?" And you know, before I had conceptions of what it meant to be a Chinese American, or stronger conceptions to be a Chinese American or an Asian American, it was very much like, yeah, I wish I knew Chinese, but at the same time, I'm very Asian in other ways that don't necessarily have to do with language. And so, but I've held it with me because not only was I shamed for not speaking Chinese, but when I did speak Chinese, I didn't know the difference between Toisan and Cantonese. And they're two different dialects, you know, for those who don't know, like they're close enough, but they're also so different that if you didn't realize I was speaking Toisan, you think I was speaking bad Cantonese. So, yeah, like I got made fun of for speaking what I thought was Cantonese, but it was actually Toisan. So, you know, like it kind of motivated me not to speak any Chinese for fear of getting ridiculed and things like that. So, yeah. So
I'm the same way. So I came to the U.S. when I was 8.
okay.
And at home, we always spoke Mandarin because my parents were older. And I would say I don't advertise that I speak Mandarin, but I can, because when I do, I sound like a second grader.
Oh, okay.
So even though I look like a teenager or a young adult, and so it just people get a kick at, oh, you talk like a little kid, or why is your Mandarin so bad? You know, just we were saying. So it reinforces my reluctance to embrace more of my Asianness. And that's unfortunate. I don't know where that comes from. Did you discover that as you started doing research for your documentary?
Where shame comes from, or
where shame on that particular issue? Why is it that us Chinese people shame each other for not speaking Mandarin well enough?
I think shame is used as a behavior modification. Like it's the strongest behavior modification tool that parents usually have. I mean, you think about food, and food is like one of those really basic things, but like not eating all the food on your plate is a very like shameful thing. Coming late, you know, like it's very, you're made to feel like kind of humiliated. And I think the intense thing about shame is also it's usually like it feels like a character thing or something that you have done wrong that you need to rectify right away. So it's like, well, why don't you know Chinese? Like, why aren't you more this or that? And it's all about those expectations that others have put on you that you're just not living up to.
Yeah, that word expectation makes me anxious already. So, so given that backdrop, what motivated you to get into film school, and then how did you arrive at this thesis that became the documentary called Laundromat?
Yeah, great questions. I think the thing, like my pathway into film was like very unexpected. I was like thinking about PR advertising mostly because I had no idea what to do with my life. And more we should like not expect 20-year-olds to have it like all figured out. But you know, I think so I started getting interested in films. I started watching films with friends who were very into film. I was like, oh, this is really amazing. And then I started taking like practical application classes for communications and film. And I started realizing that of all my classes, the film classes were the ones I spent the most time in. I was like, oh, what if I could do this? Like, what if this is my thing? And then at the end of my time at UCSD, my undergrad, I saw this film. It was at an Ivy conference. Like, I don't know how many people of your listeners know about InterVarsity, but like, it was a missions conference at UCSD. And I saw this, it was a really short video, but it was basically these medical missionaries, you know, going into what I think was Cambodia or Laos. And there was, you know, like there was a lot of civil war at that point, and they were helping people of both sides. Like they were going through the jungles, these medical missionaries, and trying to heal whoever they could find. And what I realized as I was watching was that there was somebody following them. There was somebody with a camera witnessing kind of like these people do this amazing thing, but also these horrific things, right? Like these people who were like in deep fear for their lives, people who were hurting each other, and they would help whichever side. So like I had this like it was a very like Damascus moment where I felt like, light shines and you're like, ding, like this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. I want to tell stories. I want to bear witness to other people's, kind of stories. And so, fast forward, oh gosh, at least 4 years after that, when I finally got the courage to go to film school, I'd always told my mom like, I'm thinking of going. She's like, when are you actually going to do it? And that's it's kind of different for an Asian parent to be like, yeah, film school, like what a great idea, So I was lucky in that way, and also lucky that I had like a passion and a specific goal after graduating. So gone to film school, and then kind of what we call in script writing, the inciting incident was that my mom got sick. So my mom got sick my second year of film school, and like she was rushed to the hospital. We found out she had pancreatitis, which is like where, the enzymes start eating the pancreas. Like it's very painful and it's very scary. Like whenever your parent gets sick, it's like, it's such a like disruptive, thing. And so, I was thinking about all these things because my family didn't want to tell my extended family. And so that silence around the sickness kind of extended beyond and into my school life, which like I was like one of the few Asians, and yet I felt compelled to keep my mom's sickness a secret from classmates. And it's like, well, what do they care? Like they don't live under the same cultural rules as you do, and yet just there was a pervasive silence, almost as if I was being physically like silenced. And I don't think it was my family's intent for me to feel shame around the sickness, but there was definitely something heavy, that I wanted to examine. And I was sitting in her hospital room because we would take turns doing overnight stays. So I was just sitting and I just started writing. I just started writing and writing and writing. It's like, what causes this? Why am I like this? Are other people like this? And then from there, I kind of like did a 1 page. Like I pitched it to my professor. She was like, give me a 1 page of this. She read it and I emailed it to her, and she like called me, left a voicemail and said, thank you for this gift. Yeah, it was a very intense, like solidifying experience. Like, oh, well, this is something I'm going to pursue in my second year as my second year film. And then when I was done with that, I was like, well, you know what? There's a larger story to be told. So then I did it as a kind of like a featurette for my thesis. So that's the long answer to your question.
Well, we have time. This is podcasting. There's no clock. There's no advertisers. Please. So thank you for sharing all of that. It has a very personal genesis to this really powerful project. And I've been looking and pursuing you for well over a year, because when I heard about the documentary, I was like, wow, here's a documentary that's willing to go to places that most of us as Asians and Asian Americans do not go, because we don't want to air our dirty laundry. That's the metaphor that many of us grow up with. And as I think about the title, I'm at Laundromat. I don't think I've bumped into Asians at the laundromat, because we all like to have our own appliances at home. And I know in my family, even though we ran a small restaurant and motel business, they still thought of themselves as higher class than other people. So having that hierarchy was still very important to Chinese people. At least that's my point of reference. So like picking the metaphor of laundromat, where people began to share openly and honestly. And unfortunately, I didn't find out about the documentary until after it was released and after all the screenings. And it says something like coming soon, it'll be available on DVD or
Mm-hmm.
streaming, and it never came. I was like, oh,
I know.
And now I finally get to talk with you. And as this episode is being released, your streaming is coming online on almost everywhere people stream. So I'm so excited to get to see it, but also to talk to the documentary maker. So thank you for making time to unpack some of that background.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think I mean, it's nice to hear that like you were also anxiously awaiting, because it sometimes you as a filmmaker can feel like very isolated, especially documentary. You know, you're sitting in a room, you're working on this thing, and you have collaborators, but then in terms of interacting with your audience, that's always a tougher thing because in general, these things are kept silent, right? Like we don't like you hit the nail on the head, like we just don't want to talk about mental health, we don't want to talk about shame, and then you're right, like the laundromat itself, I think, is supposed to create a space, is supposed to initiate dialogue, and it's just the start of something. Like when I was first conceptualizing this thing, I had this idea about a community, I wanted a forum. The original website actually hosted all these stories, and I was asking people like, hey, submit your stories, and there was like a second life of these beautiful stories that people submitted, like similar to the farewell. I had a friend who submitted a story where her dad got sick and didn't tell her and her sister until they graduated from college, and it was just like, it's kind of devastating for her, like as an adult, to think, well, like my family didn't trust me, or they thought, oh, my education was more important than how I felt about, their health and things like that. So yeah, I mean, doing the laundromat and putting it out there, because it's based on my personal story, it's a little bit intense and scary, but then I'm also like excited to kind of like help others not like feel less alone, to go to see themselves in these stories, but also like for those who are outside the culture to kind of understand contextually like where a lot of this pressure comes from, like all these like model minority things, and because sometimes the things that we are hiding they're very prosaic. Like they could be about death, they could be about, the way that we interact with our parents and how tense that can be, but the most important things in our lives, we still have trouble expressing, so yeah.
Yeah. But I also found it unusual in the years that I've been in the laundromat as a college student and as a young adult and during times of transition, I didn't exactly get into personal conversations. So I was curious how you framed it as a place where people did open up and share those vulnerable stories.
So you're talking about like, how did I get people to kind of share, like open up?
That's part one. And then part two, in a laundromat setting, because I don't get into those conversations, or am I going to the wrong laundromats?
Well, it'd be amazing to have,
because the machines are running, it's loud,
Well, I think that, yeah, laundromats themselves don't really, like literal laundromats don't really lend themselves to like amazing conversation.
Okay.
And it's all about creating metaphorical spaces wherever you find them. Oftentimes it's like, let's go grab boba, right? In college, it's like, let's go out, let's go, do this or that. And sometimes like, as I grow older, it's like, I have to make intentional time to, especially since I moved out of LA and away from most of my circles, like intentional like phone time to say, hey, like let's talk about something that's like very deep and dear to my heart. But the way that I sourced people for this documentary, at least from a friend perspective, was, who was I having conversations with beforehand? Like, who am I already sharing some of these life things with? And all the people, for better or worse, were like people that I went to UCSD with. Like I wasn't getting like this wide variety. It's like I focused in on like my high school friend, and then two friends from UCSD who had already started to share with me. And even though I thought I knew their story, like as we sat and talked, like they kept peeling away layers, and it was such like a privilege to get to hear their stories. That's what I love about being a filmmaker, is just the opportunity to sit and listen and experience someone sharing like parts of their soul with you, basically, you know. Especially as an Asian American, it feels even more significant, you know. Yeah.
Very much so. Very much so. Well, thank you for creating that space and capturing some of those stories. Anything else you want to say about the documentary itself, so that people will understand why they need to get onto that streaming and watch it as soon as possible?
Yeah, I wish I had somebody else here, because honestly, people always have better one-liners about my film, because like they're like, "What's your film about?" I'm like, Asian cultural silence and shame, the high numbers of suicide and depression within the Asian American community." And I know those are like big sells. I think what, you know, I want people to know about the film is that, you know, you are seen, you're not alone. If you've ever wondered of like how to talk to your parents, or if it's even possible, like I think this film is about opening up your eyes to that possibility. What was important to me about this film was showing a range of people wherever they were at. There were some people who they felt like they'd never have a better relationship with their parents, that their parents would never change. And then I have friends who, by the end of the movie, were like, I have to be more of the adult in this situation and actually extend grace to my parents. And you know, here's the thing, like, um, you know, I talk about parents as like as if they're the ones always who are the villains here, but you know, we're all perpetuating these cycles of you know, silence and shame, and how we do things differently is, you know, what's gonna define us. So like, no, there's no villains, there's no heroes. There's just people who are like processing out how they were raised, you know, like these events that have happened that are really painful. And what I wanted to show was even that process of going, like the realization that like, oh, I had to, you know, I have one of the characters in the film, his brother dies, and he's the middle, and his older brother dies, and he's like, oh, I have to be the older son. And what does that mean now? Like, who am I now that I'm the oldest child? Like, what's my role now? And, you know, we're often asking ourselves as, you know, Asian Americans, you know, like, there's always like that sibling hierarchy, right? You like,
yes,
oldest one is delegated all the responsibility, you know, and then everybody else falls into line. But then it's, you know, those roles and like, yeah, there's just so much examination that I hope like will really, even though it was made 6 years ago now, or started 10 years ago, you know, I think there's so much that's so relevant. You know, I'm going to watch The Farewell eventually, and I think, you know, it's very apparent that or even Crazy Rich Asians, you know, we have so much that we want to talk about and share, and we're still trying to figure out those things. We're still trying to find our laundromats where we can get some of that stuff out and actually share with others and be vulnerable. I think that's a scary thing.
Yes, very much so. So I think I do sense that. I do sense a feeling of hope that these stories are opening up not just to Asian Americans, but also people worldwide, and we're able to get a better look at the humanity that we have as Asians and Asian Americans that was just unseen and kept silent, and we got stereotyped and misunderstood, and we're hiding in pain and suffering needlessly, I would put it that way, and having a lesser quality of life. So, yeah. And if this was a real talk show, we could say, set up the clip, and then you could show a clip of the movie. And
they're just going to have to go to the website. Can I ask you a question, actually?
Yes, go ahead.
If you could make a film based on your podcast, Like, what would that film be? Would it be something that's like scripted? Would it be a documentary? Like, what do you think you would create for yourself?
The thoughts crossed my mind, actually more in a book format, but
Okay.
we go the film format. I could see if things go wildly bigger than my imagination, I could see the film being a chronology or a history of how erasing shame created a movement and actually did erase shame. And not just on the topic of mental health, but on changing culture, because now we're free to talk and not be shamed for being broken and having imperfections and having doubts and all those things that we struggle with, because shame keeps us from getting the help we need when we struggle with mental health, feeling less than when we don't accomplish our personal expectations or someone else's, being put down by others because we don't measure up to their standard or culture's standard, and so on. And I mean, the most obvious place where shame is the silent killer is the suicide rate is just way too high. And I think it's way too high in Asia and Asian American subcultures. And then it also exists in other minorities too. So as I began this erasing shame conversation, that I find Latinos and African Americans, they have their flavor of shame also that the typical Anglo-white American doesn't. And that's not to say they don't have it, but Brene Brown has popularized it. But for her, it's such an individualistic, just a painful experience personally. But there's so much more when you're in a community. So I could envision erasing shame being an example of how to start something small that can easily multiply, because I'm doing this with no budget, no staff. And I'm happy to help others start a conversation on shame and in the Latino culture, in the African American culture, how shame affects relationships. There's so many topics, so I could see a whole network of podcasts if people are willing to host that conversation. The way you overcome shame is by having healthy, honest talk. And podcasting lends itself to that so easily.
Yeah. Do you find that for Asian Americans, it's important to have the conversation like more explicitly about shame, or are there other ways for people to learn how to erase shame as Asian Americans?
Yes, there are definitely other ways to do it. So I've seen it done through art and poetry, and certainly you can do it through metaphor and other interactions with people, because I do think it does require interaction with people and not just a video game or an object. It needs to be a live interaction, I think, was what makes the difference. But I'm just thinking off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not only talk therapy that everybody has to go through that path to find.
Right. Yeah, I still feel like such a newbie when it comes to like talking about mental health issues within the Asian American community. But the more, I stay involved with this film and also in other spaces where people are more cognizant and willing to engage in those discussions, that there's definitely not one right way to do it, and that that we as Asian Americans have to find our own pathway towards that. Yeah. So it's very cool.
And for the record, mental health is a daily struggle for me, so it's very much on top of mind all the time. And I realize that the more examples we have and the more conversations we have about all different aspects of life, it helps us to be healthier people and understand how to be gracious and understand that we're all in process, and there are ways that we can find hope and healing, and we don't have to despair when we're in a corner.
Right.
Yeah. Now, in addition to the laundromat, you also wanted to foster conversations, and you did that with your discussion board you mentioned earlier. And you're also a fellow podcaster.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've listened to a few, not all the episodes, but I've listened to a dozen or so, and I really love the banter that you have with your co-host, April.
Oh
And
yeah, I'm so lucky to have her. Seriously.
So how is it that you came up with these nicknames Bull and Badger, and what do you talk about every week?
Oh my gosh. So I wish I had a better story for the Bull and the Badger. I literally do not. But it was like in college when my friends were like, we're talking about like, oh, what kind of animal are you? And then I got stuck with Badger, mostly because I think people thought it would annoy me, and then it kind of stuck. I think badgers are pretty cute if you if you see them like a real badger. And then for her, she's a Taurus, like the astrological sign, but also I think there was a time where she was like kind of obsessed with the symbolism of the bull. You know, I think about it kind of like separately, and like when you talk about a bullish market, like it's on the up, so I think subconsciously maybe there's something there. But for the bull and the badger, like when April decided to come in and do my documentary with me and to have these discussions, she wanted to make sure that these conversations that were happening in the movie could continue, but it didn't have to be so heavy all the time. Because like you and I, we're not sitting here like in heaviness all the time. Like we might feel that, but we also feel a different range of emotions, and she wanted that reflected in the podcast. So we do a lot of laughing. Like honestly, it's a reflection of our friendship. That's
great.
I mean, because I've known her since high school, so it's been a long time. But in general, like we find topics where like we're interested in it. Like, hey, have you ever thought of like talking to somebody about this or that? And we'd scratch our heads. But there's so much range to the Asian American experience. That's not that hard to kind of find people. Sometimes, like what we'll do is we'll actually find people and we'll go, "What do you want to talk about?" Because we've met so many cool people, and I'm sure you've had this experience too with your podcast. It's like it's one of the most rewarding parts of podcasting is that you're conversating with people who you maybe never thought you would sit across from, and you're getting new thoughts, you're learning new things, you're exposed to different perspectives and things like that. And I always try to get people who I think like just they know more than me. I want to soak up their knowledge. Like I just want to pepper them with questions and kind of examine the way that they are moving through life and the healthy ways that they kind of do things, or their unhealthy things that they're kind of talking about. And like before I release the movie, I'm trying to do a couple. One is about online dating, and then the other one is about my friend who went through postpartum depression, and just having more conversation, opening up about these things, because that's one thing as a mother. Like there's so many expectations for you as a mom, and you feel like a failure when you're depressed. You feel like a failure when you can't show up for your child, in certain ways. And the thing is, you're sleep deprived. you know you're lacking in energy, your body's going through all these hormone changes. So it's like I don't know why more people don't have postpartum depression, or it's probably just really underreported. But those are the kinds of things that come up in the podcast and things like that. We were kind of on hiatus actually since I moved up here, so we're back in it, season 4, trying to finish out strong. So
hey, what a coincidence! I'm about to start season 4 this fall.
Yeah. Are you gonna incorporate anything new for season 4, or hoping to?
Well, I need a new co-host, so if you're available, maybe we could work something out.
Hey, yeah, keep in touch. Like,
okay.
I love just talking to people. I think that's, I guess you could say it's a gift or a curse, but I like to conversate. I like to dialogue with people. I mostly try to learn to listen better, but also like I'm the type who something that you say, like I'll be like, oh my gosh, that made me think of something else. Let's keep continuing to have that conversation. Which is probably why the podcasts are like an hour, because you can't stop. We're constantly chatting.
That's so cool. That's so cool. Yeah, in my In my desire, I run into a lot of people that monologue,
Sure.
and I don't want to lecture. So when I can find a good conversation, man, I want to be there. So I'm
Yeah.
with you on that. I'm with you on that.
I find as an Asian American, like this whole thing of like, wait till the person stops speaking, then you take turns. Like, I get bulldozed at my workplace right now, mostly because I'm like minority culture,
Uh,
and I don't want to adapt to their style of conversation. But I don't know. I'm going to figure something out. But hey, if you ever need somebody to kind of help pinch hit, like let me know. I might be available.
Awesome.
I'm
Awesome.
yeah. I'm
I
always
know you have a
excited with
very full
questions.
schedule, though.
It's a little bit full. It's a little bit full. I've been working a lot from this new job, but yeah,
Yeah. Are you staying healthy?
I'm trying to. That's a great question, actually, because so I see a therapist every other week,
Yeah.
and then yeah, um, and actually, so I did the movie because
Uh-huh.
so the movie was done in like 2013, and it still took me like another 2 or 3 years to actually go like I want to go to therapy, even though I made this movie destigmatizing therapy. So like there's no shame in people for people who aren't ready.
Mm-hmm.
Once you're ready, like such a good process. And then I got lucky with my first therapist, who I got through the Fuller Seminary clinic.
Mm-hmm.
And then the therapist that I have up here, I really lucked out on. Like, he's Asian American.
Mm-hmm.
She's Christian. We can have these like
Mm.
therapy sessions, but also like kind of, activate. And she knows what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, when we're talking about faith, when we're talking about sin,
Mm-hmm.
talking about trigger words, because I think when you ask the question like, um, what do you think of when you think of shame? The church actually comes up a lot too, like capital
Yeah.
C church
Yep.
and like home churches and things like that. And,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think being a pastor's kid, I was exposed to a lot of expectations. I was exposed to like people like literally like straight up telling me like, well, you'd be pretty if you weren't so overweight, and they didn't say overweight, they said fat. And I was like, cool, like Asian aunties and stuff like that. And it's very much like you are inculcated to experience shame from a place that's supposed to embrace you,
Mm-hmm.
from a place that's supposed to
Mm-hmm.
embrace broken people. And so, when I get into church spaces, it's very important for me to hear from the pulpit, like, like when you're depressed, like something's not like wrong with you, like don't pray it away, like you can get help.
Yes.
Like there's other ways to
Yes.
do things, and it's,
Right.
it's very important. So I went a little bit off track, but we were talking about a Lord.
We're
This is
talking
what
about
happens.
if you're staying healthy, it's all right.
Yeah, so yeah, healthiness. So healthiness has to do for me with like that therapy, with finding a
Mm-hmm.
spiritual community.
Good.
And then
Good.
the third thing is physical health. And so I
Excellent.
found boxing. Boxing is my thing right
Awesome.
now. Yeah, it feels so good because I shifted my goal from like losing weight and like undoing bad habits to the idea of being strong. So like
Nice.
reframing to something a little bit more positive that I thought I could do and just show up for myself. Like that really helped me get healthier, like mentally, and then actually commit. Because I think,
Great.
when it's a punitive thing, you're kind of like, oh, I have to work off this ice cream or this cake or, like just a regular meal, or I have to look a certain way. Yeah, it's discouraging because when you don't show up, then you beat yourself up.
Yeah. The work is already hard enough as it is, and it just makes it harder.
Right. Yeah. So.
Well, I'm so proud of you.
Thank
You're
you.
making such great progress, and the film is being made available, streaming everywhere. Amazon Prime, yes?
Amazon Prime, iTunes, Google Play, like Vudu, some other places that I wouldn't even have thought of putting. Yeah, like pretty much almost any platform, but like the three main ones are Amazon, Google, and iTunes. Yeah.
Great.
But
Great.
yeah,
Great.
thanks for.
So glad you reached the finish line, finally.
Yeah,
And
well, hey,
what's the next film you're dreaming of?
ooh, good question. So I am doing
You're a filmmaker, so you're always dreaming.
Oh, dude, it doesn't stop actually. I'll come home from work and then you start working on the next thing. And so the thing that I'm working on right now is related to mental health, but actually is kind of coming at it from a very sideways, like yeah, sideways angle, which is I met this woman who's a an underwater photographer, and what she does is she photographs people who have been through PTSD or who are currently experiencing PTSD, who are survivors of cancer, survivors of car accidents, who are rape survivors, all these survivors of abuse, and she'll do these underwater photography sessions, and there's great power in being underwater and feeling kind of like free and safe, and she wants that feeling that she gets from like scuba diving and swimming to transport that to other people. And so she turns the best example I have is that she met this woman who's a breast cancer survivor, and this woman had a double mastectomy and was a dancer. And so what she decided to do was do a nude photography session, and it was a way of reclaiming her femininity, her body, her beauty, and she takes these amazing, gorgeous photos of them underwater. They've got these like chiffon things. They're like everybody looks like a mermaid. She even did some veterans who are missing limbs, and it's like, how do you reinterpret your body in ways that can make you feel beautiful inside and out? So yeah, so it's a much more
fascinating idea.
Yeah, it's very visual. That's why I'm excited about it. And it's very different from things that I've done before, which is very like talking head interviews, like long sit down kind of thing. So I'm excited. I'm really excited. Yeah.
Well, make sure your cameras are waterproof.
Yes. All of them are housed. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to have to start wearing a lot of bathing suits. So.
Okay. So where do people go to connect with you on the documentary? What's your website address?
So the website address is the laundromatdoc.com. So that's THELAUNDRO. Yep, DROMATDOC.com. Laundromat spelled with an O, doc, as in documentary.com. And that's my new improved website from the last one. So hopefully people are still finding film. People are still being exposed to the podcast and the community that you can find. And, we have suicide hotline numbers and things like that on there. Cause one thing that, April was experiencing when she was depressed was just Googling things. And that's all people, that's the best way that people find resources nowadays. So I'm hoping to kind of connect with those people online who are just seeking something where they feel less alone, and so they feel seen and heard.
Excellent. Thank you for making yourself available for that. We'll add a link in the show notes at erasingshame.com, and I'll link to your Facebook page, your podcast.
Thank you.
Link to Twitter, Facebook, anything else you use?
I don't do Twitter. We definitely have a Facebook. It's facebook.com/the Laundromat Documentary. That whole phrase, which is way too long. If you, I wish I could do Twitter. I just can't.
That's okay.
It's to preserve my mental health, basically.
No, excellent. Do that. Erasingshame.com. Keep it easy for you. And then you can just click on the links. Vanessa, so wonderful to connect with you. And I will definitely stay in touch with you. Be well, be healthy.
Thank you.
Hope to meet you in person one day.
Yeah, I hope we can high five. And thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for wanting to see this documentary, wanting and to interact. And I think thank you for creating this podcast and for keeping it up. I mean, it's hard. It's hard when you're having to do it solo. It's hard when you don't have budget, but I see you making it happen, and it's something for yourself, but I think other people are finding it and really connecting. So congrats.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Yeah.
Congrats to you. Can't wait to see
you.
the film. All right. Bye-bye.
All right.
Thank you for being a part of Erasing Shame. Please rate and review on iTunes. subscribe on YouTube, and like on Facebook. Share with your friends and followers. Get all the details at erasingshame.com.